All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're going to look past the big horsepower numbers and talk about what really keeps an engine alive, its lubrication system. We're doing a deep engineering comparison between a turbo engine and a naturally aspirated one. And trust me, what's going on with the oil is where you see the real difference. On the surface, it seems pretty simple, right? One engine breathes on its own, the other gets air forced into it. But that one single difference sets off this incredible chain reaction, a cascade of engineering challenges that puts an absolutely brutal demand on the engine oil. So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll lay down the foundation, the basics of lubrication that apply to any engine. Then we'll follow the oil's journey through each system to see the different paths they take. After that, we dive into the big one, heat, and how it changes everything. We'll look at the common failure points, a turbo's kryptonite, really. And we'll finish up with a solid workshop guide to keep your engine running for the long haul.
Okay, so before we can really get into the turbo versus NA debate, we have to be on the same page about what engine oil is even for. No matter what kind of engine we're talking about, oil is its absolute lifeblood. It has a few critical jobs that are totally non-negotiable for survival.
So what's on its job description? Well, number one, obviously, it lubricates. It keeps all those fast-moving metal parts from grinding themselves into dust. It's also a coolant, pulling heat away from hot spots like the pistons. Then it's a cleaner. It grabs all the nasty soot and metal bits and carries them to the filter. And finally, it helps create a seal between the piston rings and the cylinder wall. These jobs are universal to any engine.
Now, the engineering principle that makes this all possible is called hydrodynamic lubrication. This is the holy grail. It's where a part, like a crankshaft bearing, is literally floating on a high-pressure wedge of oil. There is zero metal-to-metal contact. This is the state we have to maintain to prevent wear, and it is absolutely central to this whole conversation.
All right, with those fundamentals covered, let's actually follow the oil on its trip through the engine. You're going to see that while the goal is the same, get lubrication everywhere, the path it takes in a turbo engine involves a really critical and high-stress detour.
In a naturally aspirated engine, the journey is just beautiful in its simplicity. The oil pump picks up oil from the sump, pressurizes it, pushes it through the filter, and then it flows through these internal channels to all the bearings and moving parts. Once it's done its job, gravity just pulls it right back down to the sump to start the cycle all over again. It's a clean, efficient, closed loop.
But now, let's throw a wrench in the works. Let's add a turbocharger. And this isn't just another part. This is a precision assembly, spinning at insane speeds, getting cooked by exhaust gas, and it's relying on that exact same oil to survive. This completely changes the game. See, the flow starts the same way, but look at these additions. We tap into that pressurized oil, send it out through an external feed line to the turbo center bearing. After doing its job of lubricating and cooling that incredibly fast shaft, the now much hotter oil has to drain back to the sump through a separate return line. This detour adds a ton of complexity and a whole new level of thermal stress.
And this right here brings us to the single biggest factor that separates these two systems: heat. A turbo is powered by scorching hot exhaust gas, and that introduces a kind of thermal energy into the oil that a naturally aspirated engine just never ever sees. Think about this number for a second. Over 800 degrees Celsius. That's the temperature of the gas hitting the turbine wheel. That heat just soaks right into the turbo's housing, the very same place our engine oil is trying to flow through and survive. It's an absolutely brutal environment. So the most important thing to understand is this. The oil's job description has fundamentally changed. It's not just a lubricant anymore. In a turbo engine, the oil is now a primary cooling fluid for one of the hottest parts on the whole car. It's doing two incredibly demanding jobs at the exact same time. And this chart just lays it all out. Thermal stress, moderate in an NA, but through the roof in a turbo. That drives the oil temp way up, often over 130 degrees C. That extreme heat causes the oil to oxidize, basically to break down and burn, much, much faster. And of course, the whole system is just more complex. In every single way, it's a far more hostile world for the oil. So, what happens when this high-stress system gets pushed too far? This is where we leave the textbook theory behind and get into the real-world stuff that mechanics deal with every day. These are the specific failure points that make a turbo's lubrication system so fragile. Let's play out a super common scenario. You've been having some fun, driving hard, the turbo is probably glowing red, you pull into your driveway, turn the key, and kill the engine. What is actually happening inside that turbocharger in that moment? The second you turn off the engine, the oil pump stops. Circulation is zero. but that turbo is still incredibly hot. So the oil that's left sitting in those little feed and return lines, it literally gets cooked. It bakes into these hard carbon deposits, and that process is called coking. Over time, that carbon builds up and it's like a clogged artery, restricting flow until eventually it starves the turbo of oil completely. And this leads to a huge difference in how these engines fail. In an NA engine, failure is usually a slow burn, a bit of bearing wear, maybe some sludge. It gives you warnings. But in a turbo engine, failure can be instant and catastrophic. A brief moment of oil starvation from a coked-up line can cause that turbo bearing to seize immediately. The margin for error is razor thin.
Okay, we've seen the problem, we've seen the stakes. Now, what's the solution? This isn't about being scared of turbos. It's about respecting the engineering. So here is a practical, workshop-level guide to making sure that the lubrication system lives a long, healthy life.
First, this is non-negotiable. Use a high-quality, full synthetic oil. It's just way better at resisting that intense heat. Second, cut your oil change intervals. That oil is working way harder, so it degrades faster. Third, give it a cool-down period. Just a minute of idling after a hard drive lets the circulating oil pull heat away from the turbo and prevents that coking we talked about. You should also regularly check those feed and return lines for any leaks. And finally, after a cold start, just let it idle for a few seconds to make sure that oil gets all the way up to the turbo bearings before you put a load on it.
So this brings us to the big question at the end of it all. A turbo gives you incredible performance, no doubt, but it comes at the cost of higher stress, more complexity, and needing a much stricter maintenance routine. So for long-term ownership, you really have to ask yourself, is that trade-off worth it? And that's an answer only you can decide on. Thanks for watching.